Amara Johnson, a 16-year-old teenager, had always lived in the shadow of others' expectations. The only daughter of a real estate mogul and an activist mother, she grew up in a world where appearances were often more important than reality. Her father, Reuben Johnson, was one of the most influential men in town, a respected businessman, but his daughter was always searching for the truth, often ignored or underestimated in a world of appearances. The pressure on her young shoulders was immense, and although she enjoyed the privileges of her name, she struggled to create an identity of her own, far from the social expectations that surrounded her. One fall afternoon, while Amara was shopping for her mother in a luxury department store, an unintentional incident occurred. She brushed past a jewelry display without paying attention, and in the commotion, a precious necklace fell to the ground. A customer, who witnessed the scene, immediately shouted aggression. Within moments, Amara found herself trapped, wrongly accused of theft. The seller, frightened and destabilized, let himself be carried away by the scene.
Chaos broke out.
The police arrived quickly, handcuffing her and taking her away in front of passers-by. The crowd's murmurs were heavy with judgment, their gazes filled with stereotypes of a modest-looking black girl, as if her very presence was proof of guilt. What should have been a simple error of judgment became a public tragedy. And this drama was going to be brought before the courts. The day of the trial came earlier than expected. The court was packed, a scene of palpable tension. The judge, Arthur DuPont, a man of around 60 with a face marked by years of service and the subtle prejudices of a system that seemed unchanged to him, took his place on his dais. He was not insensitive to the stereotypes that circulated about young people from working-class neighborhoods, and he already had a preconceived opinion of young Amara. Silence hung over the room, while Amara was escorted by her lawyer to the dock. She wore a simple dress, a serene face, but her eyes showed a depth of thought that few were used to seeing. She was calm, but her thoughts were swirling. Why me? Why this label of thief? But she knew that it was her dignity that must guide her. She would not give in to fear or humiliation. The trial began, and Judge DuPont spoke to Amara in a condescending tone. "Young lady, you seem like a good person, but it's strange how some people from your background can sometimes get drawn into regrettable acts." The murmurs in the room were immediate. The judge's remarks, although veiled in politically correct terms, were clear in their implication. Amara, clenching her fists under the table, remained silent. She knew she had to stay calm. The testimonies began. The seller and another witness claimed they saw Amara handling the necklace, but neither saw any direct theft. The prosecution's witness, a customer who mistook the scene for foul play, was willing to swear that he saw her steal the item, although the accusation was built on speculation. Amara felt the injustice of the situation weighing on her. She looked at her lawyer, a rather experienced man, but visibly nervous in the face of the opposition represented by Judge DuPont. But something happened as the hearing progressed. Amara looked up at the judge's face, and she saw the confirmation of her worst fears, a man who believed his stereotypes more than the truth. After several hours of arguments, tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch.
Judge DuPont, visibly annoyed by the pleas, slowly stood up.
His sharp gaze fell on Amara, and his tone, cold and implacable, echoed in the room, like a hammer blow ready to bring down the verdict. He looked at the file, flipping through the pages with a slowness that conveyed his sense of authority. "It seems that the situation is clear," he began, his tone dry and haughty. "A robbery has occurred, and there is enough evidence to conclude that you are responsible. Maybe your family has protected you from the truth up until now, but today you will have to answer for your actions." A wave of anger coursed through Amara's body, but she remained in control. Each word of the judge seemed to sink in like a blade of hot iron, but she showed no weakness. This moment was crucial, a turning point, and she knew she had to be stronger than ever. His clenched fists were the only manifestation of his inner struggle. She was ready to speak, to defend herself, but before she could speak, the sound of a door suddenly opening interrupted the session. A man entered, with a confident gait and an authoritarian demeanor. His arrival cut off everyone in the room, like an icy blast disrupting the precarious balance of the court. He wore an elegant, perfectly tailored suit, and every movement seemed measured, considered. A presence that instantly commanded respect. "I apologize for the interruption, but it appears we have a misunderstanding here," he said, his voice ringing with unquestioned authority. His eyes landed directly on Judge DuPont, and something in his gaze changed the atmosphere of the room. The judge turned instinctively, visibly surprised by this unexpected interruption. The man walked up to the dock and, with a calm but determined gesture, filed an official document before the judge. This gesture provoked an immediate reaction. The defense lawyer turned pale, and Judge DuPont stood up with an almost imperceptible movement, his face visibly falling. The silence in the room was heavy, everyone waiting for the outcome of this unexpected turn of events. "I'm Reuben Johnson," the man announced, his voice clear and full of certainty. "And I just found out that my daughter, Amara, was wrongly accused. I have been following this situation closely, and I want to correct the mistake. The necklace in question belongs to me, and it was never stolen."
Amara is innocent.
A stunned silence fell over the room. The murmurs of the spectators died away like waves crashing on the rocks. Reuben Johnson, the town's respected businessman, had just made a public statement, appending everything the court thought it knew. He had just revealed that Amara was not just an ordinary teenager, as the judge had perceived her. She was not the victim of a youthful whim. She was the heiress to one of the most influential and powerful families in the country, a reality that many were unaware of or chose to ignore.
Judge DuPont's face slowly fell.
He blushed with shame and confusion. His prejudices had become evident, his certainties shattered. The weight of his position of power, which he had always believed to be incontestable, suddenly seemed very fragile. For the first time, he seemed uncertain, like a man facing a truth he hadn't seen coming. Amara, remaining calm, slowly got up. His gaze was fixed, determined, a glint of dignity in his eyes. She stepped forward with measured steps, and in a voice surprisingly firm for a teenager, she addressed the judge. "What you said, what you insinuated," she began, "is not just an insult to my family. It is an insult to my dignity, to my person. You judged me based on the color of my skin and not my actions. You reduced me to a stereotype, to a preconceived image. But today, it's not about you or this trial. It's about justice." Judge DuPont lowered his head, visibly unsettled. For the first time, he seemed to realize the extent of his mistake. A heavy, almost solemn silence reigned in the room. It was not simply a legal victory, it was a victory over prejudice, over a system that had failed, a slap in the face of the injustice that had existed for too long. The murmurs in the room died down as he delivered his verdict, his voice now less sure, almost faltering.
"Amara Johnson, you are innocent."
The weight of these words fell on the assembled, but it was no relief for Amara. No, she knew that this victory was only the surface of a deeper struggle. A fight against prejudice, against the injustice that lurks in the shadows. But for now, she knew she had won. Not just for herself, but for every person, every family, every community who had been the victim of this same biased gaze. And deep in his eyes, a glint of determination appeared. It was only the beginning. But beyond the judgment, it was a profound and unexpected realization that occurred in this courtroom. Judge DuPont, usually cold and inflexible, seemed, for the first time, touched by the reality he had ignored for so many years. In a rare moment of lucidity, he turned to Amara, his face marked by palpable embarrassment. The man, usually so haughty, seemed confronted with his own demons. His words, although clumsy and tinged with his characteristic arrogance, were full of an attempt at reparation. "I admit my mistakes," he said in a weaker, almost hesitant voice. "I am committed to reviewing my practices." These words, spoken in a room where the silence weighed heavily, were supposed to mark a turning point in his attitude, a desire for redemption. But to Amara, it was clear that the sincerity of his words would forever be tested by the years of silent injustices he had perpetrated, knowingly or not. The judge was a man of power, but his power was now shaken by the truth which had just destroyed his certainties. Amara, however, did not dwell on this confession, nor on the judge's attempts at repair. The justice he had just meted out was just one act among many in a world where the system, like DuPont, was still steeped in a long history of racial prejudice. She does not rejoice in this victory, which, even if it was legal, did not fill the void left by the humiliations and invisible wounds caused by this process. She stood up slowly, her intense and respectful gaze fixing the judge, but also everyone present in the room. "Justice is not an act that is rendered only when it is obvious," she said calmly, but in a firm, confident voice. "She is a dignity that must be respected at all times." These words carried wisdom far greater than his years. She knew that what had happened in that room was not just a personal victory. It was an echo of what generations before her had had to endure, a cry of resistance against an obsolete system that left little room for the truth except when it was imposed. At these words, the silence became denser, and even Judge DuPont, caught in silent contemplation, seemed touched by the depth of what Amara had just said. But were his apologies enough? Was this belated recognition sincere, or simply an attempt to regain a facade of respectability after the collapse of his power? As the court emptied, leaving behind an echo of murmurs and thoughts, Amara found herself alone in the center of the room, but this moment marked the beginning of a new battle for her. She knew the road would be long and strewn with pitfalls. This victory was only the first step. Because for her, it was not only her name that she was defending, but the name of all those who, like her, had been judged before even speaking, before even having the chance to be heard. For Amara, this victory only lifted the veil of a much larger and more systematic injustice. She was not only fighting for herself, but for a collective re-education of society in the face of its deep racial injustices. This awareness, however late it was to serve as a catalyst for broader change. For each Amara, for each family, for each individual subjected to the silent violence of prejudice, it was necessary to relearn how to see beyond appearances, beyond stereotypes, and above all, respect human dignity as a fundamental, inalienable right. This moment of justice, as symbolic as it was, marked the beginning of something much bigger. Amara turned towards the empty room one last time, a slight smile, but determination visible in her eyes. It wasn't the end, it was just the beginning.